poor single mother was humiliated at the parent-teacher meeting, but when she was given the floor, Peter's world was turned upside down. The day his father, a tall military man in uniform, walked out of the house with his usual smile and never returned. His father had always seemed invincible, a rock in the turbulent sea of life. His disappearance left a vast emptiness, as if the very heart of the home had stopped beating. Peter's mother, Maria, tried to hold it together, but each day became more difficult. She worked at the library, surrounded by books that had once been her refuge but now reminded her of the evenings spent reading by a lamp with her husband beside her. Each returned volume now whispered of loss. Money became an increasingly pressing problem. Bills piled up on the kitchen table like unwanted guests, and the refrigerator grew emptier by the day. Maria sold almost all the valuables that could bring in some cash. Each sale felt like a betrayal of the memories of the days when they were all together. Peter sensed the tension. He was only 6, but he had learned to read his mother's eyes. He saw her fatigue hidden behind a smile, and it changed him. Where once he had been a mischievous child, now every gesture seemed sharper, every prank a challenge to the world that had taken his father. On the threshold of September 1st, Maria took Peter's hand and led him to a second-hand store. The shop was small and crowded, its walls buried under a sea of clothes hanging on old, rusted hangers. The smell of time, trapped between vintage jackets and faded jeans, filled the air, creating an atmosphere of forgotten pasts. The store seemed like a repository of other people's memories, each item carrying the story of another lost life. Maria carefully selected clothes for Peter, lost in thoughts about the lives of the people who had once worn these garments. Each sweater, each shirt, seemed to her not just a piece of fabric, but a symbol of experiences, joys, and sorrows. She picked up a white shirt with a yellowish tint that seemed to have seen many school days before. "Mom, who wore this before me?" Peter asked, clutching the sleeve of the shirt. His voice was full of curiosity and a hint of melancholy. Maria looked at her son, saw his furrowed brow, and realized he felt the weight of history just as she did. "I don't know, dear," she replied softly, "but I'm sure that this shirt belonged to a boy who loved exploring the world. Perhaps he ran through puddles and climbed trees just like you, and now this shirt will accompany you on your adventures." Peter smiled, and for a moment, his eyes sparkled with imagined scenes. He envisioned the boy who might have worn this shirt, playing pirates or explorers, saving friends in childhood games. "Mom, can we get it?" "I'll wear it and imagine that I'm an explorer too," he said, looking at his mother with hope. "Of course, Peter, this shirt is yours now. You'll be the smartest explorer in it," Maria said with a smile, hugging her son. She placed the shirt in the basket and continued choosing items. Each piece they selected became part of Peter's new story. The patched pants that had seen many adventures and the slightly oversized boots, ready for new journeys, filled him with excitement. Peter saw them as talismans, endowing him with the strength of those who had worn them before. As they left the store, Maria felt Peter's hands tighten around hers. She looked at her son and saw determination in his eyes. For a moment it seemed to her that he had grown up a few years. At that moment she realized that despite all the difficulties, they could get through this together. They walked home slowly, talking about school, the friends Peter would make, and how he would tell them about his explorations. Maria listened, her heart warming. That day she understood that while their future was uncertain, they had each other, and that was the most important thing. The second-hand clothes had become not just a necessity, but a symbol of a new beginning. However, on his very first day at school, dressed in his new but already worn clothes, Peter faced mockery. "Where did you find that shirt?" "In a garbage dump," the other kids jeered. He tried to ignore them, but the words hit him like hail, piercing through his new armor. That day at school ended far worse than it had begun. When Maria arrived to pick him up, she found Peter sitting alone on the swings in the schoolyard, a bruise under his eye. It was just the first of many days where she would have to wipe his tears and hold him until he fell asleep, dreaming of the days when his father would be with him again, laughing and telling stories of far-off lands and brave deeds. These were not the best of times for the little boy and his mother, but they stuck together, holding hands tightly, standing on the edge of a precipice where it would have been so easy to slip. Autumn was cold and rainy. Great clouds like old friends hung low over the small town where Peter and Maria lived. The wind whispered around the corners of their old house, reminding them of the impending winter. On such days, Maria often remembered her husband, his warm smile, and how he used to say he loved the rain because it always led to clear weather. Peter sat by the window in his room, watching the raindrops trickle down the glass. He recalled the past year, his first day at school, the ridicule from his classmates, the first fights. He felt the old wounds, and his heart started to ache again, as if they had never healed. Maria entered the room with a cup of hot cocoa and sat down beside him on the windowsill. She knew that the autumn rains brought melancholy to Peter and stirred memories of the past year. "Peter, you know, every time you look so sadly at the rain, I remember how your dad taught you to make paper boats to float them in the puddles," she began gently, handing him the cup. Peter smiled, recalling the bright moments of his childhood. "Mom, can we make a few boats like we used to? Maybe the rain won't seem so sad." Maria nodded, and together they began folding boats from old newspapers. It was a small but significant activity that momentarily diverted them from their heavy thoughts and memories. Once the boats were ready, they went outside into the rain. Peter eagerly set them afloat on the streams of water while Maria watched him, feeling her heart warming as they both helped each other forget the pain. Returning home, they sat by the fireplace wrapped in warm blankets. Maria told Peter stories about how she met his father, their travels and adventures, and how they dreamed of building a future together. "Everyone has scars," Maria said, noticing her son's attentive listening. "But every scar is not just a reminder of pain, it's also a symbol of what we've survived, what has made us stronger. Your scars are a part of your story that makes you unique." Peter stared into the glowing embers and thought about his mother's words. He realized that his scars were not just reminders of past hurts, but evidence of his strength, his ability to persevere and move forward despite all difficulties. "Mom, thank you for being here," he said, hugging her tightly. Maria held him close. "I will always be here, Peter. Together we are stronger than any storm." That evening, listening to the crackle of the fire and feeling the warmth of his mother's embrace, Peter truly believed that after the rain, clear weather would always come. Early morning hours draped the world in soft twilight, with only the eastern horizon beginning to brighten, promising a new day. Maria stood in the kitchen, handling an old cup adorned with faded patterns. Each morning began with coffee, which she brewed before Peter's alarm rang. When the coffee was ready, she approached the window, which offered a view of their small but cozy backyard. Everything was quiet, and only the distant hum of the morning city reminded her that work was soon to begin. Maria understood well that the day ahead would bring new challenges, just like every day spent in the library and the cafe where she worked part-time. Peter's morning routine was always rushed. He didn't like waking up early, and each morning was a small challenge for him. "Mom, have you seen my backpack?" His anxious voice called from his room. "It's on the chair where you left it yesterday," Maria called back, already dressing in her work uniform. She would leave the house earlier than Peter, leaving him breakfast on the table and a reminder not to be late. Each time she closed the door behind her, she prayed for the day to go smoothly for both herself and Peter. Working at the library was a lifeline for Maria. Among the books and quiet shelves, she could momentarily forget her difficulties. She loved the atmosphere, the tranquility and solitude interrupted only by the whispers of visitors and the rustling of pages. But this sanctuary was only a temporary refuge. The second part of her day began at the cafe, where she served coffee and pastries. Life there was bustling, with people darting back and forth and orders coming in rapid succession, leaving Maria often feeling exhausted by the end of her shift. "Maria, quick. 2 cappuccinos and 1 espresso," the chef shouted to her back. She nodded in response, trying hard not to make mistakes with the orders. Returning home was a small triumph for her each day. Arriving home, she would find Peter having already completed his homework and waiting to tell her about his day while she prepared dinner. These were the moments when she felt that all their efforts were worth it. "Mom, I got an A on my history test today," Peter proudly declared, his eyes shining with happiness. "I'm so proud of you, dear." "You're doing great," she replied, hugging him. In those moments, all the difficulties seemed to fade into the background. Each day was a challenge, but also a testament to their strength. They faced every obstacle together, holding on to hope despite the exhaustion and endless worries. Maria knew that as long as they were together, they could get through any tough day. The school hallways always seemed to Peter like a place where every step echoed in his heart, causing anxiety or excitement. The walls adorned with colorful drawings and bulletin boards couldn't mask the tense atmosphere among the students. Peter walked slowly down the corridor to his classroom, feeling the eyes of other kids on him. Rumors about his past fights and his family's poverty had already spread throughout the school, making each day a trial. Today seemed no different. As he approached his locker, he heard whispers behind him. Turning around, Peter saw 3 boys from a parallel class. One of them, Tommy, was known for his tendency to bully. "Hey Pete, is it true that your mom works 2 jobs to feed you? Maybe you should get a job too, like as a janitor," Tommy asked with a sneer. Peter felt his cheeks burn with anger and shame. He clenched his fists, trying to control his rage. He knew that any fight would only make his situation worse. "Tommy, stop," Peter said quietly, trying to remain calm. "Oh, look, seems like he's serious," Tommy laughed, and the others joined in. Peter quickly closed his locker and hurried away, but Tommy's words continued to echo in his mind. With each step down the corridor, he felt smaller and smaller, as if his own insecurities were swallowing him whole. In the classroom, he took a seat at the back, trying to remain unnoticed. However, the oppressive feeling of isolation clung to him. The teacher started the lesson, but his thoughts wandered far beyond these walls to a place where he didn't feel like an outcast. After school, Peter usually tried to leave quickly to avoid further confrontations, but today his path crossed with Miss Jensen, the English teacher. "Peter, can I speak with you for a minute?" Her voice was soft and non-judgmental. They stopped in an empty classroom where Mrs. Jensen closed the door behind her. "I've noticed that you've been upset a lot lately. If you need to talk, I'm always here to listen," she said, looking him directly in the eyes. Peter was taken aback by her words. He had grown accustomed to hiding his feelings, but suddenly he felt an urge to open up. He nodded, struggling to swallow the lump in his throat. "It's just hard. Everyone looks at me like I'm poor. I don't know how to handle it," he confessed. Mrs. Jensen stepped closer and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Peter, you're not alone. And remember, other people's opinions do not define you. You are a smart and talented boy. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Mrs. Jensen's words filled him with renewed strength. Leaving the school corridors that day, Peter felt that despite all the difficulties, he could find the strength within himself to move forward. Peter stood in front of the school, gathering his courage. The morning was fresh, and the air filled his lungs as if urging him to face the new day with confidence. But confidence was exactly what Peter struggled with within the walls of this building, where every step felt like a challenge. Struggling to overcome his inner resistance, he walked into the corridors, which were already buzzing with the voices of students. He headed to his locker, hoping to go unnoticed, but his hopes were in vain. "Hey, Peter, wait up," came a voice from behind. It was Mark, one of those who rarely missed an opportunity to mock him. Peter stopped reluctantly, turning around. Mark was already standing with two of his friends, a smirk on his face that was anything but friendly. "Listen, we figured you need to learn how to tell jokes if you want to fit in with us. Start with a joke. Come on, make us laugh." Mark nudged him with his elbow as the others laughed. Peter's heart raced, but this time he decided not to back down. "All right," he said, taking a deep breath. "Why did the chicken cross the road?" "To get away from people like you who think jokes can hurt someone." For a moment, silence hung in the corridor, and Mark and his friends exchanged puzzled glances, clearly not expecting such a response. "Oh, look, Peter's got some sharpness in his tongue," Mark finally said, his tone revealing irritation behind his mocking smile. "Better sharpness in the tongue than emptiness in the head," Peter quietly added, already opening his locker. Peter's words, though spoken calmly, elicited a wave of laughter from some passing students. Mark felt his control slip, which only heightened his irritation. "You will regret this, Peter," he muttered through clenched teeth before turning away with his friends. Peter closed his locker and slowly made his way to class. With each step, his confidence grew. He realized that words could be his shield, as powerful as fists. He didn't want to fight, but he also decided he wouldn't remain silent when he was insulted. In class, Peter sat reflecting on the events of the day. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he could stand up for himself without resorting to violence. This realization gave him a new strength coming not from fear but from self-respect. He finally understood that his words had weight, and he could use them to defend himself rather than just as a shield against attacks. Soft beams of spring sunlight streamed through the school windows, lighting up the classroom where Peter sat lost in thought. Spring had always been a time for new beginnings, but for Peter, it also meant inevitable farewells. The school year was nearing its end, and many of the friends he had made would be moving on to other schools or classes. The thought of these upcoming separations made his heart ache. Among those he didn't want to say goodbye to was Alice, a girl who had always been a source of support. She was one of the few who didn't believe the rumors and saw more in Peter than just a poor kid from a troubled family. Their friendship began with a chance encounter in the library, where they both sought history books and quickly grew into a strong bond. Today was the last day Alice would be attending this school. Her family was moving to another city. Although they promised to keep in touch, Peter knew things would never be the same. "Promise you'll write once you settle in?" Peter asked, as they walked out of the school building together. "Of course, Pete, and you write to me too. I'll always be happy to hear how you're doing." Alice smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. They stopped at the school gates, where Alice's mom was already waiting. The farewell was brief but emotional. They hugged and promised each other to keep their friendship alive despite the distance. After the car with Alice and her family turned the corner and disappeared from view, Peter stood there for a long time. He felt like something inside him had left with her. As he walked home, he pondered the ever-changing nature of life and how easily one could lose those they care about. The next day at school, Peter felt a sense of emptiness. The hallways, classrooms, even the library all reminded him of Alice. He knew he had to learn to accept farewells as part of life, but his heart stubbornly refused to agree with his mind. That evening, Peter decided to write Alice her first letter. Sitting at his desk in his room, he began, "Hi Alice, I hope you arrived safely and that you like your new home. Things at school are just not the same without you. I miss our talks and even your jokes about my old sneakers. I can't wait to see you again, maybe during the holidays. Your friend, Peter." As he finished the letter, Peter felt a weight lift from his heart. He knew that farewells were just new meetings yet to come. Each parting made him stronger, teaching him to appreciate the moments spent together and to cherish the memories as his most precious treasures. A new semester began at school, bringing new challenges for Peter with new students joining the class. It could mean the start of new friendships, but for Peter, it also meant new trials in his struggle for acceptance. From the very first days, Peter sensed a tension in the classroom. The new students, unaware of his past troubles and constant fights, quickly learned about them through school gossip. One of the newcomers, Eric, seemed particularly eager to establish his place in the class hierarchy, and it appeared he wanted to use Peter for this purpose. "So, you are the Peter everyone's talking about. Heard you're the local fighter. Show us what you've got," Eric provocatively challenged during recess, surrounded by his new clique. Peter sighed, feeling the old urge to prove himself returning. But he remembered the lessons from the past year and his mother's words. True strength lies in words, not in conflicts. He tried to remain calm despite the challenge. "I don't see the point in fighting. It won't solve anything," he replied, trying not to meet Eric's gaze. Eric, however, was not ready to back down. "Oh sure, you're just scared." "Figures," he said sarcastically, walking away with his friends and leaving Peter standing alone. Eric's words stung, but Peter tried not to show it. He knew that his real struggle was not for a place among the mockers, but for his own dignity and right to respect. He decided to focus on his studies, as education was something that could truly offer him a better future beyond his current circumstances. Days passed, and although the whispers and taunts didn't subside, Peter found solace in books and learning. His grades were high, and teachers frequently praised him for his diligence and knowledge. This gave him strength. The support from Mrs. Jensen was particularly meaningful, as she saw his potential and always took the time to encourage him. "You're going to achieve great things, Peter. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise," she said to him after one of the classes. Her words felt like a beacon in the fog of doubts. Peter began attending extra classes in mathematics and other sciences, determined to pursue a scholarship for further education. He knew that each step forward in his studies was a step toward a new life, where he would be valued for his accomplishments rather than rumors. Every day at school remained a challenge, but now Peter understood that his fight for a place in the sun was not a battle for recognition among peers but a struggle for his own future, where he could define his place and destiny. Peter slammed the locker door with a disgruntled bang, trying to drown out the whispering that followed him down the corridor. He had grown accustomed to rumors and taunts being part of his school life, but some words still managed to wound him deeper than any physical blow. That morning started with Eric, the new kid in class, spreading a fresh batch of rumors about Peter's family. Heard his mom not only works as a waitress at a cafe but also does something else on the side for a certain fee, he said. Convinced that his words wouldn't reach Peter, but the words did reach him, each one hitting Peter like shards of glass. He tried to remain calm, reminding himself that his mother did everything she could to support him, and that her work in no way diminished the love and care she gave him. During lunch, as Peter sat alone in a corner of the cafeteria, a younger student approached him. The boy looked at Peter with clear curiosity before asking, "Is it true that your mom works at a bar?" "My brother says that's bad." Peter felt bitterness rising in his throat. He looked at the younger boy, seeing in his eyes innocent curiosity rather than a desire to hurt. "You know," Peter began quietly, "sometimes people do hard work to help their families. It doesn't make them bad. My mom is the best person in my life, and I'm proud of her." The boy nodded, seeming to understand the explanation. He even smiled before walking away, leaving Peter with thoughts about how often people wrongly judge others without knowing the full story. After school, as Peter walked home, he reflected on the power of words and how they could shape someone's perception and feelings. He resolved not to let those words control him or define who he was. He knew his truth and understood that his mom was doing everything possible and the impossible for his future. That evening, sitting across from his mom at dinner, he suddenly said, "Mom, I want you to know that I love you and I'm proud of you. No matter where you work or how much money we have, you do more for me than anyone else could. And I'm grateful for that." Maria smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes as she took his hands in hers. "And I'm proud of you, Peter. You're my little hero." Those evening words became a solid shield against any mockery or gossip. He felt that as long as they were together, they could face anything. The evening sky was studded with stars as Peter sat in his room, gazing into the darkness outside his window. Today had been especially tough at school. There had been another altercation with Eric, who seemed determined to make Peter's life unbearable. This time, the conflict escalated beyond just a verbal exchange. Eric, encouraged by his friends, crossed the line, threatening physical harm. Eric's words, filled with contempt and anger, echoed in Peter's ears as he walked home. "You'll never be one of us. You'll always be a nobody," Eric had yelled, surrounded by his gang. Sitting alone in his room, Peter let the tears flow. He cried not so much out of fear or pain, but from a sense of hopelessness and loneliness. But the tears were not only a symbol of weakness, they were also a sign of catharsis, the release he desperately needed. After the tears had dried, Peter took a deep breath and approached his old desk. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. At first, the words came slowly, but gradually they flowed more freely and confidently onto the page. Peter wrote about his feelings, his fears, and the pain he endured each day. He wrote about his mother, her struggles, and sacrifices for his future. He wrote about his dreams and hopes, which seemed so distant in these moments of despair. When he finished the letter, he read it over several times, each reading revealing a new strength in his words. It wasn't just a letter, it was his declaration of independence, an acknowledgement that he would no longer let fear and insults define his life. The next day at school, Peter felt different. He walked through the hallways with his head held high, despite the whispers and sidelong glances. When Eric tried to provoke him again, Peter stood his ground, looking directly into Eric's eyes. "I won't let you or anyone else make me feel less than I am. I am not beneath you, and my story is not a joke for you to laugh at," Peter said calmly but firmly. Eric, caught off guard for the first time, stepped back, and his friend stopped snickering. This moment was a small victory, but for Peter, it meant much more. It was the moment he stopped being a victim, navigating through tears to newfound confidence, and he found solid ground beneath his feet. He was no longer swayed by the winds of hostility. As autumn arrived, the wind brought not only leaves swirling across the schoolyard but also a harbinger of the changes Peter had long hoped for. Each day at school felt a bit easier, as if the heavy clouds above his head were beginning to disperse, making way for the sunlight. However, alongside the realization that he could stand up for himself came the understanding that true change takes time. The school hallways still echoed with whispers and snickers, but Peter now perceived them differently. He had learned to distinguish empty words from those that truly mattered. His self-esteem was growing stronger, and he began to pay less attention to those who tried to provoke him. One of the highlights of the autumn was preparing for the school science fair. Peter chose a topic that truly fascinated him: the impact of technology on modern education. Working on the project took up much of his free time, and he felt that his enthusiasm for the research gave him the strength and confidence he needed at school. Maria watched her son's passion and efforts with pride, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment in his persistence and maturity. "You're doing great things, Peter. The first see you growing not just as a student, but as a person," she said as they sat together over evening tea. The science fair turned out to be a turning point for Peter. His project sparked interest not only among students but also teachers. The presentation went surprisingly smoothly. He spoke confidently and clearly, his eyes shining as he answered questions. It was his small triumph, his moment when he truly felt he deserved his place in the sun, not for his ability to stand up to bullies, but for his intelligence and hard work. After the conference, he walked home through the autumn park, reflecting on how much had changed over the past few months. He realized that he no longer felt like a victim as he once did. He was determined to keep moving forward despite all obstacles. Nevertheless, the anticipation of change was still accompanied by difficulties and challenges. Not everyone at school was ready to accept the new Peter. Some continued to see him as the same boy as before. But now, Peter knew that his future was not something decided by others but something he chose for himself. With each day spent in the pursuit of knowledge and self-improvement, he stepped closer to his goal with confidence and dignity, navigating through all the tears and pain of the past towards self-assurance and a bright future. Maria felt a sense of unease as she entered the school building. Parent-teacher meetings were always a sign of trouble, and today she anticipated hearing several complaints about her son. She knew Peter wasn't perfect, but every time teachers and other parents pointed out his mistakes, she felt an overwhelming urge to defend him, to explain and justify his actions. The meeting began promptly at the designated time, and Mrs. Jensen, the homeroom teacher, wasted no time getting straight to the point. "Your son has atrocious behavior in class," she began with disappointment. "He's constantly getting into fights, bullying others, and the way he comes to school, patched up pants, yellow shirts, mismatched shoes." Maria felt her heart tighten. She glanced around at the other parents, some of whom nodded in agreement with the teacher's remarks. "If you can't provide, don't have kids," someone from the back shouted, causing whispers and snickers among some of the attendees. "I understand that you're on your own, but that's no excuse," Mrs. Jensen continued. "Peter is a smart boy and he excels academically, but his behavior is out of line. If this continues, we'll have to expel him." Despite his grades, Maria felt tears welling in her eyes. She had heard these complaints almost every day but had been unable to change the situation. She knew her son was a kind and caring boy who tried to protect himself, not be an aggressor. All these years she had remained silent, trying not to worsen the situation, promising teachers that she would talk to her son, that things would change. But today, something inside her broke. "I can't listen to this anymore," she said aloud, standing up. All eyes turned to her. "Yes, I'm on my own. Yes, we're not wealthy. But my son is not a thug. He's smart and talented. He wins competitions and brings home medals that the school should be proud of. He reads books that many adults would struggle with. Why don't you talk about that?" Maria paused, catching her breath. The room fell silent, waiting. "My Peter always tries to protect himself and others. And yes, sometimes he comes to school differently than others, but that's no reason to make him an outcast. We are all here for our children. Let's help them grow, not drown them in criticism because of the difficulties they face every day." But then the parent committee erupted in outrage. The tension in the air was palpable as someone, filled with indignation, jumped up from their seat. "How much longer are we going to tolerate this troublemaker?" the person shouted, roughly pointing at Maria. "I don't care about your earnings or grades. If my child regularly comes home with bruises because of your son, I've had enough. He should be sent to a special school where he can learn to behave." Others quickly picked up on his sentiment, shouting their grievances, each voice overlapping the next, creating a noisy and chaotic atmosphere. "Exactly how much longer are we supposed to put up with this? He doesn't belong among normal students," voices rang out from the crowd. Maria stood stunned by the sudden burst of anger, feeling her hands tremble. But instead of backing down, she gathered her strength to respond. "I understand your concern," she began, her voice trembling but trying to sound as firm as possible. "No one wants their child to suffer. But doesn't every child deserve understanding and support, not condemnation? My son isn't perfect, and none of us are, but I know his heart and his truth. He fights not because he wants to hurt others, but because he often finds himself cornered, having to defend himself." She looked at the teachers, seeking support in their eyes. "I urge the school and parents to work together to understand and help all our children rather than rejecting them when they need us most. We need to set an example of empathy and understanding, not hatred and division." Her voice was firm and clear as she stood up to address the accusations directed at Peter. "The first, I'm ashamed of you," she said, and her words cut through the room. "I am also ashamed for your children and for your behavior." A palpable silence fell over the room, almost tangible in its weight. Maria seized this pause to address the father of one of the students who had just attacked her. "You say my son doesn't belong in this school? That he fights?" She paused, capturing the attention of everyone present. "Do you know why he hit your son the last time, causing him to come home with a bruise?" Her voice rose to a shout. "Your son insulted him." "Well, your son probably lied, and it doesn't cost much to take it," the man sneered in response, clearly not grasping the depth of the situation. Despite the boiling anger inside her, Maria continued with even more resolve. "Is that what you think? Did you know that your son shot a kitten with an air gun, and my Peter picked it up and nursed it back to health?" The accusation against another child caused a stir among the attendees, but Maria did not stop. "And your daughter," she turned to another mother, "did you know that she steals money from her classmates' wallets?" My Peter tried to stop her, which is why he got hit in the face with a book. "And your children," she continued, addressing everyone present, "constantly mock him for his clothes, leaving him no choice but to defend himself. My son is not an angel, but he's not a monster either. He reacts to the circumstances you create with your words and actions. Why is there so much hatred and malice in you and your children? Why, despite your advanced age, do you continue to judge people by their clothes rather than their actions?" Maria paused briefly, catching her breath, then continued. "You know that a girl from the parallel class had a fire in her house a week ago. Everyone miraculously survived. But what you don't know is that my son was there that evening and helped that family escape from the burning house. He even searched for and saved the girl's beloved kitten." The classroom filled with surprised and excited murmurs. Parents, teachers, and even the school principal began exchanging glances, realizing that the situation was far more complex than it had first appeared. Maria, noticing that her words were starting to have an impact, decided to continue. "Yes, you didn't know this," she said with feeling, "and I wouldn't have known either if Peter hadn't come home that evening covered in soot. I asked him what happened, and at first he didn't want to tell me, afraid I would be angry, but then he admitted that he was passing by the burning house, heard cries for help, and without thinking, rushed inside. He helped people get out and found and carried out the kitten that was hiding under the sofa. When everything was over, he quietly went home." She paused, glancing around at the parents whose expressions were now less hostile and more attentive. "The next day, the girl's father came to see me," Maria continued. "He thanked me profusely, telling me how Peter saved their lives. He said that my son is a real hero. Can you imagine that? My Peter, whom you all consider a problem, did something not every adult could do." A dead silence fell over the room. Maria seized the moment to make her final argument. "Yes, I work 2 jobs, and yes, money is tight, but tell me which of your children would greet you after work if you were late? And how many of you have ever eaten a meal cooked by your child? My Peter often cooks dinners so I can rest after work." Maria looked around, seeing how her words were touching the hearts of the parents. She continued, determined to keep the audience's attention. "And whose child walks the neighbor's dog because she can barely walk herself? My Peter does. He cares about the people around him, even when things are tough for him. He knows how to empathize and help, even when no one sees his kind actions." A heavy silence hung in the classroom. Parents, teachers, and students alike began to realize that their previous perceptions of Peter had been unfair and shallow. Maria stood before them, her eyes shining with tears, but her voice remained steady. She knew that she was finally speaking the truth that everyone needed to hear. Her speech sparked a wave of realization and reflection in the hearts of those present. Parents who had previously been against Peter began to understand that every child has their own story, full of trials and victories that are not always visible at first glance. Maria continued to stand before the gathering of parents, feeling how each of her words resonated in the hearts of those present. She decided to conclude her speech by emphasizing the most important points that could change their attitude towards her son. Finally, she asked, "Who among your well-groomed and well-dressed children can claim a scholarship to the most prestigious school in the city?" Her voice rang loudly as she scanned the room, and everyone froze, waiting for her next words. "Yes, you heard right. We are indeed leaving, and I came here today to collect his documents." Many parents looked puzzled and surprised. Maria continued, her voice strong and proud. "My son, because of his academic achievements, has been accepted into the best school in the city, and now he will study there. His knowledge, diligence, and love for learning have been recognized and appreciated. He earned this place not because of money or connections, but through his hard work and dedication to his education." She looked at the faces of those present, watching their expressions shift from disbelief to surprise and even admiration. But Maria knew her speech wasn't over yet, and she had one last piece of news to deliver. She continued, her voice trembling with an emotion she couldn't hide. "I received a call today from my husband's military unit. He has been found. He's alive. He was a prisoner all these years, but now he's coming home alive and well. And he's been awarded a War Hero's Medal and recognized for his service to the country." The room erupted with gasps of shock and joy. Maria could barely hold back her tears of relief and happiness. She knew that her life and Peter's life would never be the same again. "So I won't be working at the cafe anymore," she declared confidently. "My husband, as a hero, will now receive a decent pension. And the first thing I'm going to do with that money is buy my son the best clothes and toys he has long deserved." She paused, allowing her words to sink into the minds of those present. The room was filled with a silence charged with understanding and reflection. "And your children," she continued, addressing the parents, "what have they earned apart from those bruises from all the hurtful words and actions they directed at my son? Let's teach them to be kind, to support one another rather than inflicting pain and suffering. My Peter won't be studying here anymore, but I hope his example will teach all of us to be better." With these words, Maria fell silent, giving the room time to absorb what she had said. She watched as parents exchanged glances, some looking embarrassed, others deep in thought. The teacher standing in the corner finally found the strength to speak. "We didn't know," she began, but trailed off, realizing that any words would seem superfluous. Maria nodded, acknowledging her attempt, and then, with her head held high, she left the classroom. She made her way to the principal's office to collect her son's records, feeling that her mission was accomplished. Peter was waiting in the hallway. He approached as she exited the office, and they embraced, understanding that they had overcome an important chapter in their lives together. Now they faced a new chapter full of hope and promise, where they would no longer feel alone or rejected. After the parent-teacher meeting, Maria and Peter walked out of the school feeling not only a sense of relief but also a newfound confidence in the future. The streets, which once seemed gray and oppressive, now appeared brighter, and the air was filled with a sense of change. "Mom, I'm so proud of you," Peter said as they walked home. "You said everything I felt but couldn't put into words." Maria smiled, looking at her son. "I'm proud of you too, Peter. You've been through so much, but you stayed strong." Now better times are ahead for us. A few days passed, and the news of Peter's father returning spread throughout the town. People who once looked at their family with disdain now came with congratulations and words of support. The principal of Peter's new school personally called Maria to confirm all the details and discuss plans for the future. The day came when Peter was to start at his new school. The morning was clear and sunny, as if nature itself was blessing this new beginning. Maria helped Peter get ready, carefully checking that he had everything he needed. "Don't worry, Mom," Peter smiled, noticing her concern. "I'll be fine, I know, dear. I just want everything to be perfect for you," she replied, giving him a hug. The new school was impressive in its grandeur: tall buildings, spacious classrooms, and well-maintained grounds. It all seemed like a dream compared to what Peter was used to. He felt a bit out of place, but remembering his mother's words, he gathered his courage and stepped forward. The new class greeted him with interest and curiosity. The teacher, Mr. Harris, was a kind man in his middle years, with wise eyes and a warm smile. He immediately introduced Peter to the entire class, highlighting his academic achievements. "Welcome, Peter. We're glad to have you in our class. I'm sure you'll make many friends here and have plenty of opportunities to showcase your talents," Mr. Harris said. The first days at his new school were a period of adjustment for Peter. He was getting to know his classmates, trying to understand the rules and nuances of the new environment. Despite some challenges, he felt that he was being accepted and respected here. One day, after classes, one of his new classmates, Thomas, approached him. "Hey, Peter, a few of us are going to the cafe after school. Want to join us?" he offered. Peter hesitated for a moment but then agreed. "Sure, I'd love to." At the cafe, sitting around a table with his new friends, Peter felt like he was becoming part of something bigger. They laughed, discussed their classes, and shared stories. Thomas turned out to be an open and kind person, quickly becoming a close friend to Peter. Meanwhile, Maria, who was happily observing her son's progress, also felt changes in her own life. Her husband's return meant not only financial support but also the emotional strength she had missed all these years. Together they planned for the future, discussed how to make their home more comfortable, and cherished each day spent together. The day finally came when Peter's father, Robert, was scheduled to come home. Maria and Peter waited for him at the train station, their hearts pounding as they watched the approaching train. When the doors of the carriage opened and Robert stepped out, Peter was the first to run to him, hugging his father so tightly it seemed he would never let go. "Dad," Peter cried out, tears of joy streaming down his cheeks. Maria approached and embraced her husband as well, feeling that their family was finally whole again. "I missed you both so much," Robert whispered, holding them close. "Now we're together, and nothing can ever separate us again." In the days that followed, the family relished their long-awaited reunion. Robert shared his experiences and how he had dreamed of coming home. Peter talked about his successes at his new school, and his parents were even more proud of him. A few months passed, and the family's life settled into a new rhythm. Peter continued to excel in school, earning new awards and making friends. Robert, as a war hero, received the recognition and respect he deserved from those around him. But most importantly, they were together. Together, they faced challenges and celebrated each new day. Their story, full of trials and triumphs, became an inspiration to many in their town. Now, as they looked to the future, they knew they could overcome any obstacle because they were a family that nothing could break. Although the journey to happiness had been long and difficult, Peter, Maria, and Robert knew that true change begins with believing in yourself and in those you love. They understood that together they could overcome any hardship and achieve any goal. Their story became a true testament to the strength of their family bonds, which, like a strong thread, had woven their hearts together forever.